Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for Wednesday the 8th of July. And joining me on this edition are Assistant Editor Steve Withers.
I think this guy's a couple of cans short of a six-pack.
And Audio Reviewer Ed Selley.
Phased plasma rifle in the 40-watt range.
So, welcome back to the weekly podcast. Apologies that we were not around last week, but we're all ready and raring to go, as you can tell, because there's two missing. So we're going to crack on with the podcast this week. We're going to go to competitions first, and then we're going to go to a subject which will explain why we were not around last week. So, competition-wise, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on Blu-ray is available 13th of July, that closes, and Heat on Blu-ray 22nd of July, that one closes. And previous competition winners, Mark Hell won Black Swan on Blu-ray, and Alistair G won the Yamaha RX600D, RXS 600D, get it right, AV receiver, and that was courtesy of Scan. So that's the competitions out of the way. So Steve, you're waiting on the latest Panasonic, the CX802. Now Mark looked at this, that was the 50-inch version, which is edge-lit. You are waiting on the 55-inch version because
it's got a direct LED backlight. Mark did the 50-inch, and that has edge LED lighting, as you said, Phil, and the 55-inch and above will have direct LED backlighting, which hopefully should make a small, if substantial difference. Based upon his review, it looks like a stonking television. I mean, the measurements on the graphs were absolutely stellar, including colour accuracy across all saturation points. And they're using a VA panel, of course, so better blacks than last year. And so hopefully with the addition of the direct LED backlight and the local dimming, we should see an equally impressive performance from the 55-inch version when we get it in for review. It arrives tomorrow, the day before the podcast goes up. So hopefully we should have that all done by the end of the week. Now, one of the things, as I mentioned just a minute ago, that impressed me in Mark's review was the accuracy of the colours on this TV, on the CX802. And Phil, I think you can give us a bit more insight into exactly how Panasonic are achieving this incredible level of accuracy, can't you?
Yes. So last week, Panasonic invited me and a couple of others from the UK and some German editors as well over to Hollywood to explain exactly why their TVs are so accurate and accurate to the... They call it the creator's intent rather than the director's intent, and it's all about making sure that the colour accuracy is spot on to the industry standards, which everybody in Hollywood and in San Francisco, because there's also a film business in that city as well, they all work to the same standards. And the whole point of this trip was just to show us that is exactly the case. Everybody at the moment is working to DCI spec for the cinema and Rec 709 for home. And when they do the colours for the cinema, they then sit and reinterpret that for the home release, because there is a slight difference in the colour gamuts. So obviously in the cinema they use DCI P3 is the standard, which when we get ultra high definition Blu-ray and so on, that is likely going to be the standard for the next few years, at least the next 5 to 10 years, when we get that standard. So there's that, but there's also Rec 709 at the moment, which is what we have in the home. So what Panasonic are saying is that whether it's DCI or Rec 709, their TVs will try and be as accurate as possible to what the filmmaker intended you to see. So the whole purpose of the trip, we visited Panasonic Hollywood Labs. I can't talk about the first bit until IFA, because we were showing some new products, and I can't say anything more than that. And we can talk about that when IFA comes around, which is 7 or 8 weeks away, so not too long.
Not that far.
Not that long to wait on that. So one of the technologies behind what Panasonic are doing in the 802 and other TVs in their range this year is they're using the what's called a 4K Studio Master processor. Basically the processing behind the panel is all Panasonic's. They're using phosphors for wide colour rather than quantum dot. This is because they used to be the masters of plasma. They know all about phosphors, so they can use that to get a wider colour gamut, and they're reckoning that they get about 98% of DCI now. We've done the measurements, and Mark was estimating that to be 90%, so they are very, very close. That was a 50-inch TV, of course. It might be different for the 55-inch. Obviously, that's something that you're going to test, Steve. But basically, what it means in terms of colour accuracy is that in the 2015 range of TVs, they now have about 8,000 registry spots in terms of colour points. which is far more than you would normally get in a consumer TV with lookup tables. Normally you would get the points for Rec 709 and that'd be about it. Here they reckon that from 0 IRE to 100 IRE they can fix each point where it should be. So if you say you're looking at the grayscale of red, and at 50% red will look a certain shade, not all TVs can do that. And where a lot of the times when a calibrator comes along, they don't even check that. They will measure at 75% or 100%. They will definitely calibrate at 100%, and the graphs will look perfectly fine. What we do in our reviews is we do that at 100%, but what we also do is we measure each point from 25% to 50, 75, and then 100%, and check that the grayscale of each colour, or the colour of each colour, is perfect at those points. So when you take brightness away, so 50% red is half of what it would be at 100%, it has to hit a certain point, and that's what these registry points do. So there's 8,000 of them, so they're not just looking at Rec 709, you're talking about almost all the colour points that you could possibly have within each standard. So that's one thing that they're working on. They've also added 6 colour points into their CMS this year. They always just used to do RGB, which was never a bad thing, because if you get RGB bang on, normally the secondary colours, as long as your white balance is bang on as well, would come and land where it should land within the CIE. Again though, that's 100%, not 75, 50 or 25. So they're making a big point about luminance of colours and why that's important and so on. Now, one of the things that forum members always throw back at us when we talk about picture accuracy and things being accurate to the director's intent is, well, how can it possibly be that each film that's made is made to the same exact standards and all the rest of it? And you know, if you go to one studio and then another studio, it's going to be different and so on. And what this strip proved was that that's not the case. We were at Panasonic Hollywood Labs, they worked to those colour spaces. We went to Technicolor, they worked to those colour spaces. They worked to the same exact standards that we preach in the reviews. We went to Skywalker Sound and Skywalker Ranch. Again, they work to the same colour points. Obviously, in terms of sound, they don't use colours, but they're not just doing sound. You know, they do colour correction and so on as well. And all the colour correction places have a reference monitor, and most of them are Sony OLEDs, which are industry-wide. I mean, Panasonic were even using those in their demonstrations of other products, which I can't talk about at the minute, just to show how accurate they were to the reference monitor. So, for example, we were in Technicolor. We were with the colorist there who had worked on Big Bang Theory and Lost and a few other TV programs, and he had a clip of some footage from the Panasonic VariCam to show us. That's a 4K camera. It shoots at 12-bit 444. So what he was showing us was that footage and what he could do with the tools that he had at his disposal. The tools were free, which is mind-blowing. You just have to buy all the peripheral stuff to make it work. But what he could do was, he could basically go into a scene, and if I was wearing a blue shirt and the director decided that actually I wanted that to be a red shirt, he could put a power mask onto that and change the colour, and change it quite accurately. And of course there's other things. So basically what a colorist does is he takes the cinematographer and director's vision for a scene, because everything's shot flat. So I'm not sure if everybody's aware of how this works in Hollywood now, but basically any camera that they shoot on, what they do is they go for as much lateral information as possible in terms of black and white. So they try to capture as much detail as possible, but it's usually flat, meaning that there's very little colour or even no colour in the footage that they actually capture. So they're going for the latitude of the camera and trying to capture everything. And this makes sense when you come to HDR, because this is exactly what HDR is. They then put it through their machine, and the director and cinematographer will say exactly what the mood should be, how it tells the story, what colours, how the colours should look. So if you're thinking about something like, I'm trying to think of an obvious one, because Spielberg did it with a couple of his, War of the Worlds. So you went for a very baked in look where the whites were blowing out and it had a very gritty look. That's
sort
what
of slightly desaturated.
Yeah, totally desaturated and
But
blown.
like with Private Ryan as well, had the similar kind of
blow out all the highlights on it. It's the colorist that does that. It's not the cinematographer, it's not the director, it's a colorist that works on this, and then he gets approval from the director that that's what was intended to be, and that's his job basically. The interesting thing was that he had his reference monitor in front of him, but just to the side where he was checking stuff, they were using consumer screens. They were using Panasonic screens. And what they said to us at Technicolor was that they always relied on Panasonic plasmas. And of course, Panasonic plasmas no longer exist. And they had a real panic on about a year ago when that happened, maybe 2 years ago now, trying to find replacement screens that they could put in their studios and their little workshops to make sure that they could look at the reference monitor and then look at the consumer monitor to see how that was looking on that. And to cut a long story short, they have decided that the AX900 series, even though it's an IPS panel and we want that taken on with it, Steve, in terms of a top-end consumer TV, in terms of what they wanted in the studio, it's absolutely bang on. It hit all the colour points that they wanted to do. The grayscale was perfect on it, and it's as close to a plasma-looking picture that they could. Obviously, they haven't seen the CX series yet, but they did all the tests and all the rest of it. At which point, I did raise the question, well, what are you testing to? What equipment are you using to test? What software are you using? And the engineer was like, all right, if you're interested in that and anybody else is interested in that. Now, I think it was me and a couple of Japanese engineers. The rest of them went for a coffee, and we went up to his little workshop area where he had all different types of screens in. So he had the latest Samsungs and Sonys and Panasonics and so on. And surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, because we already know this, but I guess some of our listeners don't, is he was using a Klein K10, which is the same meter that we use for our reviews, and Kalman 5 software. Doing things exactly the same way as we do for our review testing, which, I mean, we knew that this happened, Steve, but it's nice to actually get proper confirmation by being in their environment, looking at their things, and them saying, well, this is what we do, and we do this every 90 days, and we go around and check all the screens in the facility. I print out a report to say that they're all accurate. The same happens in New York, the same happens in the UK, in their offices in the UK. So they know that if they look at material on any of these monitors, wherever they are in the world at one of their facilities, they'll always look the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's reassuring to know that what we've been saying all these years about, the use of standards and why standards exist in the first place are being adhered to by all these companies. I mean, we always knew that, but some people don't always think we believe us. But I mean, the only way it would possibly work is if you had a set of standards. Otherwise, nothing would look the same, would it?
Well, I mean, think of how many special effects artists work on just one scene in terms of a film, and they all work at their own workstations, and each of those monitors on the workstations have to be exactly the same. Otherwise, what's the point of them working on their bit if it's all not going to look the same when they put it all together?
It's good to know that Technicolor are using the same equipment we are to do our reviews. That's excellent.
Yeah. So that was really good.
Because obviously there are, they could have been using something hellishly expensive, like a Minolta or something like that. But
what you're saying, a Klein K10 isn't expensive.
It is, but it's not 40 grand, is it?
Well, no, it's not. And obviously when we went to visit THX to wrap up this tour, they were using a Konica Minolta top of the line machine, which not a lot of people do use. So yes, I see what you're saying. A lot of that's to be light as well, because he has to go between all the different little rooms, and there's hundreds of these little colorist rooms and mixed rooms and all the rest of it, and they all have to look the same, and they all have to be checked every 90 days as well. So to travel light, the Klein's ideal for that, and the Kalman software is usually bang on as well. But another important point that he made was that he has his reference material, which we have our reference material when we're writing reviews. So we're not just relying on what's in the charts and what the charts are saying. You're actually checking on screen to make sure, because you know the scene so well, you know what it should look like, you know what should be going on. You can then check that visually to make sure that what the graphs are telling you is what's happening on the screen. And that's very important for him, because what he said was he's representing Technicolor. Technicolor represents the fact that your images will look the best that they can possibly be and will match. And if they were ever to do anything wrong and somebody was to make a mistake because of a miscalibrated display, it puts the whole company's reputation on the line. So although he gets to do what we probably refer to as a dream job, going around calibrating all these screens, actually the amount of pressure on the guy, and the guy was called Jeff, and thanks very much to him for showing us behind the scenes, because I think the Japanese engineers they kept asking questions like, so Samsung.
I did a trip to Sony's facility, and it was the same thing as you felt. They were showing us just how much control a colorist has, and how much of the decisions are made in terms of the look of a picture of a film's image is done at the digital intermediate stage and not at the photography stage. Almost nothing is done at the photography stage now. It's just, you said, shot flat, and then everything's done in terms of storytelling and artistry is done after the fact, as opposed to the old days when you would shoot on 35mm film and you do much of it in camera as you could, and at the end of it, the color timing is basically about making each of those different reels look the same, isn't it? It's not so much changing the look of the film as much as it is just making it a consistent experience.
Yeah.
Now it's about about storytelling through color, and not just color, but they can highlight certain aspects, brighten up certain things, darken certain things. They can also remove lines from actresses' faces and all manner of stuff that gets done now at the digital intermediate stage. That is basically where the look of the film is decided.
Yep. And obviously, with us being at Technicolor in LA, that was the main Technicolor building. They had a lot of historical bits of equipment and so on. Unfortunately, they can no longer show 3-strip Technicolor, which is a bit of a shame. I mean, that was the original.
Oh, really?
It is, but it just shows you how much things are moving on. I mean, he was saying just last month they got rid of the 70mm projector from their viewing media rooms and stuff, so it's all gone digital now, which is, it's a real shame when you think back to the golden days of film, and like you say, 3-strip Technicolor, for the Wizard of Oz and stuff like that. This was pioneering stuff back then, and when you think that these guys have been around over 100 years at Technicolor, and the majority of the work they're doing now is TV programs and color correcting for that, and doing the grading and so on for different TV programs, and it just shows you how much there's been a shift towards, and we mentioned it on our last podcast, how much TV's come on in leaps and bounds in terms of how things look and how things are shot and so on. So that was day one. Day two was a trip of a lifetime for me. I know you were incredibly jealous, Steve. And I would have been if it was the other way around, because not many people get to go through the gates, and you just have to watch The Big Bang Theory to see that one episode they did try to get into this facility and were stopped at the actual gates, and it was the gates that we were at, and we went to Skywalker Ranch, and I have to say that was a moment where I could tick it off the bucket list. One thing I've always wanted to do ever since I was a small wee boy, mad on Star Wars. I wanted to go to Skywalker Ranch. I probably didn't know what went on there when I was that age, but over the years we've heard the stories of what goes on at Skywalker, the sound mixing facilities they have there. The thing that would interest you, Ed, is that the sound scoring stage is actually based on Room 1 at Abbey Road. Actually, when you stand in there, you could be mistaken for thinking that you actually are at Abbey Road. It's a fantastic facility. And you will have seen photographs of it with John Williams with the orchestra and the screen on the back wall, the big projection screen. Looked identical to that. Obviously, John Williams wasn't there. But it looked identical to that. And I've been in Room 1 or Studio 1 at Abbey Road. And I think you have as well, Steve, haven't you, for different launches and so on. And it looks the same. It's the same flooring material. It's an acoustical floor. Control rooms there. They had the pre-mixer for the headphones for the orchestra and stuff, and then the main control room. B&W's being used, Ed, which is the same at Abbey Road. Same setup there. Obviously, they can put any monitors in, any speakers in. Any speaker company can claim that their speakers are used, because sometimes they will be spec'd and they will be put in and used. But it was B&W's. It was TAD's also on show there. And I can't remember the rest because I didn't.
No Genelecs?
No, there wasn't any Genelecs, but they did say that they did have them, so they could put them in if that was what was specified and so on. So that was an interesting room. The big highlight for me, other than the main house, because the main house is the way it's laid out. You have the main house in the middle of the complex, and then Skywalker's off to one building, and then you have the mixed studios, which are way off in other buildings in the complex. It's a working farm, so there were actually labourers were in doing the hay bales and stuff while we were there. It was extremely hot, oppressively hot while we were there. Just how you see it in the photographs, the rolling hills that are yellow in colour because they're scorched with the sun and so on. But the big thing for me was the Stag Theatre, and this is probably one of the most reported cinemas in the world, and reputed to be the only cinema that sounds the way it does. There have been attempts to create cinema spaces like this elsewhere, but it's said that none of them actually do sound like it. And I have to say, I've never seen a cinema like that. It's a 300-seat cinema, but something like you've never seen before. I mean, the Art Deco design, the way that the roof works and so on, all based on Tomlin Holmanson's experiments, which were done at another facility just down the road in San Rafael, which we visited in the afternoon. I'll get onto that. But it was like a dream come true. We saw the battle between Luke and Vader in Empire, and then it cut to different scenes of films that they've been working on recently, like Oblivion and a lot of the big films that have been out so far. What's that one where Robert Redford on the boat on his own?
All Is Lost.
Yeah, where it's just the sound mix that tells the story, basically. There's not a hell of a lot of dialogue and stuff, so there was clips from that and clips from a few other things. And then we went to A New Hope, and the opening scene with the Star Destroyer and them coming onto the rebel ship and the battle and stuff, and it was intercut with the original recordings made on the set. And you got Darth Vader, who's obviously Dave Prowse, doing the lines in his West accent.
Bristol accent, yeah.
Oh, that was funny. And then obviously switching to the actual mix. And I've got to say, I was hearing things in that cinema that I have never heard before in my life. And placement of sound as well. I mean, it's a full Atmos system. So it had the 2 rows of speakers right on the ceiling, Steve, and the surrounds went right up to the screen. So a proper full Atmos setup. And yeah, it was like you got a real sense of height. You were able to pick sounds out that weren't just on the screen but were around about you and so on. And I have to say, probably one of the best cinemas I have ever been in terms of sound quality. It was stunning. In terms of picture, it was just 2K, although it still looked good on a big screen like that. But it was mainly the sound that really came to the forefront of what was going on, and you would expect that Skywalker sound.
Interesting that it's just 2K, isn't it?
Well, they had full 4K capability, and to do 3D they used 4 projectors as well, so 2 for each eye and so on. So they had the full gamut of stuff that they could do. It was just that those demo clips were in 2K.
All right.
But still, on a big screen, looked fantastic, and like I say, sound was unbelievable. And then that afternoon we went to San Rafael, and we went to the original building where ILM was set up. So it was the original theatre that Tom Holman had put together and did all the experiments to see where the surround should be and where the front speakers should be, and how bright the projector needs to be and all. And it was like a miniature version of the Stag Theatre in terms of how it looked. So that was really interesting. They mixed the soundtrack to Return of the Jedi in that theatre, and we got to hear a couple of THX trailers and that kind of thing. And then the start attraction there was Phil Tippett. His first work was the chess scene in Star Wars, which was done towards the end of the filming of that. It was one of the last minute things that they put in. And then he's done everything that you could think of from 78 onwards. And then the thing he's most famous for is obviously Jurassic Park, and the fact that he was made extinct by what ILM did with Jurassic Park, because it was all going to be stop motion. He showed us clips from his 1985 film, which was called Dinosaur. And there was a clip of raptors in that, velociraptors, and they look identical, although stop motion, to what ended up in the original Jurassic Park. And obviously he won the Oscar as well. But his main role on that film was to do the animatics, the animation before they filmed the scenes. And he was showing us his stop motion stuff against the final scenes. So it was like the T-Rex scene where it comes through the fence and there's the 2 cars and the whole movement of what the T-Rex did in that scene. He'd done all that and scoped all that out in stop motion before they did the final thing, and it looked identical. The timings were all the same. So I mean, I could have sat all day and listened to him talking, because he's done some of the best effects work, I think, ever. And a lot of that was models as well. And in the next room next to the theatre was a big soundstage where they did the speeder bike chase in Jedi. They blew up the big satellite dish in Jedi. Death Star, they did all the exteriors up on the wall, so they just hung the exterior models up on the wall, the full length of the room, and then the camera run down and it would set explosions off and all that kind of thing. And so there was that, and then there was the workshop where they made all the models and stuff, and he was saying it looks identical to how it looked in 1978. All that's been replaced is some of the machinery with newer bits of machinery, but it's laid out in the same way that it always has been, and it's now owned by another effects company, and they've just kept it the way it was. So in terms of Hollywood history, absolutely stunning. But it then took us all the way back to why we were actually there, and the message that Panasonic were trying to get across, which was the director's intent and making sure that you could see that on their TV screens. And they put a lot of effort in, and as you can tell, they pulled out all the stops on this trip to get that message across, that Hollywood does it this way and our TVs can show it that way. So if you take anything away from the trip, is that they're really going with that message, and they're trying to make their TVs look that way, and I guess it's up to us to test them and test whether that actually is the case.
Yes, exactly, which is what we've always done and will continue to do, even when we move into a new standard, I guess, over the next year. Which you mentioned earlier, Phil, which would probably be, I suppose, DCI.
The guy at Panasonic Hollywood Labs is also one of the vice chairs on the 4K UHD standard. And when I spoke to him and asked him the direct question, I said, look, 2020, it's too wide, it's too narrow a wavelength. There's not enough colour, ironically, in that to suit everybody, because people are going to see it in all the different ways. It needs to be rounded off. So, there is some kind of colour there for people to see. Is it DCI? And he basically said, well, that's what everybody's mastering to at the minute. It costs them less money because they don't have to redo it in Rec 709. If they kept it at DCI, they just have to do the whole process once in terms of colour accuracy and gamma points and all the rest of it. So he says it makes absolute sense to do it at DCI because it saves them money. Because the last thing they want to be doing with a new format is then coming up with a new colour space and then trying to move the whole industry to suit one thing, whereas the industry's all at one point as it is with DCI. The only out-of-date thing is Rec 709, so get rid of 709, bring everybody up to that standard, and that'll do for the next 10 years. And I shouldn't say that'll do, because if you've ever seen DCI spec on a consumer TV, it looks stunning compared to Rec 709. There's no need to go any wider at the moment anyway.
DCI 10-bit video and ultra high definition resolution, I think we'll be getting, not quite, but very close to what you're getting at the cinema, which I guess is any home cinemas fans' dream.
Yeah, and another point, I'm just going to touch on this because there will be a video this week, so go and search out the video because there is an interview where we go into HDR in a little bit more detail. But basically, as I was saying, the latitude of the cameras, they try to capture as much as they can. So when it comes to HDR, all they're doing there is they're making sure that they have enough brightness to make the bright parts look bright without crushing detail in the whites, and that they can get the blackest black. And it's all about the contrast between those 2 points, and it's not about the brightness. Everybody's fixated on 1,000 nits or 2,000 nits or 3,000 nits. If you were to watch a screen where it's 1,000 nits, you wouldn't thank anybody because you would be blind after an hour of watching that. You'd be coming out with blotches in your eyes and all sorts, because it's just far too bright. What they're using the brightness for is the highlights. It's making sure that if there's a light or there is a candle or some light area of the screen, then that is nice and bright, bringing out the detail without crushing it, and the darks and the blacks are as black as possible, and that gives you the wide dynamic range, or the high dynamic range as they call it. That's what it's all about. Yeah. And it was great that
the clue is in the name, isn't it, really?
And as was explained, 400 to 500 nits on an OLED, because you've already got that fantastic dynamic range given the black levels. If you can hit 500 nits for the brightness, then you're going to get HDR that looks identical to something with 1,000 nits, because it's not about the brightness, it's about bringing out the details in higher light areas of the image and making sure the blacks are as black as possible. So that was a great explanation, and that will be in the video interview, which should be up sometime this week. So let's take things onto audio very quickly. Ed, we are going to start looking at hi-fi in more detail, and this is something that I've tasked you with over the next few months. And the first thing we're going to look at are 2-channel bookshelf speakers. You have the first review that's gone up this week. So are you expecting to learn anything that you don't already know, looking at speakers that range from the budget end like the AEs are, and then looking at things as they progress along? What kind of things are you looking for or expect to see?
It's an interesting one because I have, as you know, I've been across all the places I review for, I have been sort of out of the game when it comes to reviewing relatively affordable small speakers. Now, my review of the acoustic energy has gone up, and it went up this morning, so it should still be up by Wednesday. As is often my way when I start the reviews, I start at a tangent and tortuously bring it on subject. There used to be unbelievable numbers of affordable bookshelf speakers. I mean, group tests would go on for page after page of the damn things. There has been a bit of a sort of reduction in the number of choices available, but there's still an awful lot to choose from. And I think what's going to be interesting is looking at a number of these designs from, if you like, established brands. It's going to be the first time I've really played about with a number of them since Q Acoustics has come along. And Q Acoustics has been, if you like, one of the sorry, I'll start that again. That have existed in a number of categories. They are, if you like, they specialise in being a disruptive influence. Because Q Acoustics had a different philosophy to how they were developing products, because they weren't saving technology for best. They were essentially throwing significant development and a lot of time and patience and tweaking at very affordable loudspeakers. And what, for me, is going to be interesting about this is seeing how established brands who do have to, in some ways, have a philosophy of keeping for best, because they have product ranges well over and above what Q Acoustics is offering products for, even with the advent of the concept speakers, and seeing how they can compete on budget terms with a brand that doesn't have some of the same restrictions, and how they've responded and how they've done it whilst keeping some of their sort of distinctive technologies. And the good news is, as an opening gambit, Acoustic Energy's done quite well at that. Fundamentally, they always, for me, was a speaker that was about a degree of sort of fun. They were speakers that were lively, they were fast, they were sort of... often they weren't the last word in absolute accuracy, but there was a lot of fun whilst listening to them. And the 101, they've managed to keep much of that joy, but I was astounded at how revealing and how fundamentally, accurate a portrayal of what was going on you got out of them. I reviewed, and it will go up later this month, because unusually, I need to state this as a point of pride, I actually delivered 4 reviews for AVForums whilst it was still the month I was supposed to deliver them in. Woo-hoo. Yeah, I know. Probably won't happen again in a while, but nonetheless, one of the other reviews that's going up this month is of Clear Audio Turntable, the Performance DC, and we'll cover that in later podcasts. But I was, as I said in the review copy, I was able to reach the same decisions, or would have been able to reach the same decisions about how the Clear Audio performs through the Acoustic Energies, all other equipment being the same, that I was able to reach using my Neat loudspeakers, which are an order of magnitude more expensive. That's not to say the Acoustic Energies are better than the Neats. I need to make that abundantly clear, but they were sufficiently accurate and sufficiently revealing that I would have been able to write the review of the Clear Audio using them and only them, and reach the same conclusions. And I think that's phenomenally impressive for a relatively affordable product.
It's obviously you looking at them as a nice bookshelf stereo pair, but speakers being speakers, they don't know if they're being used in a stereo setup or a home cinema setup. So could you see yourself using 5 of these maybe to make up a multi-channel setup? No
question at all. Obviously, we've reviewed... I've reviewed the Acoustic Energy 1 Series as a 5.1 pack, but there were the floor standards at the front. I have to admit, I don't think, especially given that the sub that Acoustic Energy makes for the range is actually pretty good, you'd easily be able to use 2 pairs of these in the centre without any issue at all.
I wouldn't, because they're only 30 centimetres high, so I would have 3 of the same across the front. It's all about matching the sound. So rather than going with floor standards in a centre or 2 of them in a centre, I would actually go with 3 identical.
I don't know I think they're missing a trick here, because like most brands, I don't know if they're sold individually.
Right. Okay.
But no, I do agree with you. And interestingly, nice segue, unwittingly, one of the other reviews for this month is SVS's Prime 5.1 pack, and SVS has done just that. There's just 5 identical Prime satellites. And obviously I won't give away too much for the review. There are pros and cons using a speaker that small as a centre speaker, but nonetheless, the handling across the front is, as you say, is seamless, as it should be from 3 identical loudspeakers. There is a lot to be said for doing things that way out.
Yeah, and I guess the only way you can do that in the living room, though, is with the smaller speakers. So with those, did you use a higher crossover to get around the fact that you needed a bit of bass energy in the front?
Yes. The interesting, both multi-channel reviews I've done this month, there's the Q Acoustics 3000 and the SVS Prime. The satellites actually had a frequency response within 1 hertz of each other. The Q Acoustics is 68 and the SVS is 69 hertz as a minimum frequency roll-off. What was interesting is that they both put the auto setup of the Yamaha, the YPAO system, into a bit of a quandary. It kept on trying to set a 60 hertz crossover for both of those based on the feedback it was getting, which in theory, notionally at least, would have left a 10 hertz sort of suck out.
Yeah.
But no, I manually booted it back up to 80 hertz for both of them, and I thought that was extremely effective. I mean, in the case of the SVS, extremely effective, because the system comes with the SB1000, which might be the smallest SVS sub. All things are relative, but it's a very, very impressive piece of kit.
Still a bit of a sledgehammer even at that size.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Like the other sealed box SVSs, I'm not suggesting for a moment that they're gentle, but there is a slight delicacy to the sealed box units. If you go for the bigger ported box ones, they're still quite fast and quite agile for subwoofers, but there really is a sort of woof effect when you do it. Whereas the sealed box ones, it's a little bit more delicate. And the SB1000, a genuinely impressive piece of kit. Really rather nice indeed. In many ways, again, don't want to give away too much. The subwoofers is what pulled apart the two speaker packages I've reviewed this month.
Yeah, I was just going to say it all comes down, when you're talking about subsats, it all comes down to the quality of the subwoofer. And I certainly noticed that with the M&K reviews recently, and using the V12 and then the X12, which is the big double 12-inch thing. Setting them higher, I think I was using a 100 hertz crossover with the smaller 150s, the half-sized ones, just because they did lose a little bit in the mid-range. But even just crossing over at 100 with quality subwoofer, it's non-directional, so you can't tell where the sub's coming from, even at 100 hertz. And it just made such a difference to the overall. It's so cohesive. You didn't know that the subs were there. I mean, if you hid the subs away, you would have thought the speakers were providing the audio. You know, that's how cohesive it was. Really, really good. So
is your sub at the front though?
In my normal system, I've got a sub in every corner. On the in the systems that I've reviewed, I've been using two subs, and I've had them centrally placed at the front.
Because I have to admit, I agree with you on 100 hertz crossover if the subs are at the front, if I use the front location for it. If I have it at the back, so it's nearer me, I find that 80 hertz just gets fractionally directional. Mm-hmm. I become aware of stuff which I feel really should be in the speakers starting to make its presence felt.
Yeah.
Which is why, generally speaking, I don't like going higher than 80. Certainly on the normal Logomera Placer sub, but it's all 6 1/2 dozen the other.
If you're talking that, if you can't get them centrally mounted, what I would do is put them in the corners at the front, and then use the higher crossover. Again, that gets away from the directionality of the bass then. Through the experiments that I've done in this room, and I've been using this room for 14 years now, so I know it pretty well, and that's what I've found from my experiments. You know, if you can't put them centrally, put them in the corners if you're going to use a higher crossover, and it works really well, and you can't tell the difference. Towards the rear of the room or anywhere else in the room, and depending on the room size and shape, I would agree with you, Ed, that it's a bit hit and miss. You've got to experiment with it. Okay, well, we seem to be so far on topic.
It's just not true.
we need to do something different from this point on. Unfortunately, there's no games news, but there is a games podcast if that is what you're after. So go and download that. We're going to move on next.
Can we not do so that's not games news?
We're running out of time this week, Steve. So let's just go to movie news, and we'll do that in a second. So, what's at the cinema, Steve?
I'm going to go a little bit against the grain here. I'm against popular conception. I think I went to go and see Terminator Genisys, and you know what? I quite enjoyed it, much to my surprise.
Yeah, actually, Kirsty came. Just so you know, you're not alone. Kirsty came back. She went to see it on Thursday. She came back going, "I should have hated that, but I didn't."
Yeah, I mean the trailers. And if you haven't seen the trailers, for God's sake, don't see the trailers because they give away far too much plot. And I think it would be a far more enjoyable film if you don't know the plot twist going in. But yeah, based upon the trailers and the terrible reviews that I've been getting, I was thinking, like, oh, this is going to be awful. But in actual fact, some of it was pretty good. I'm not saying it's a great film, not by a long margin. And it's got some major issues, one of which is the casting of Jai Courtney as Reese, Kyle Reese. He's a terrible actor, and he's a big, bulky beefcake, and he just doesn't look anything like Michael Biehn, and they should have hired a completely different actor for the role, and that's an unfortunate thing. Emilia Clarke actually looks an awful lot like a young Linda Hamilton, but she looks a bit too young. She looks about 12 sometimes, like a puppy fat 12-year-old, which is kind of disconcerting because she just seems too young at times. I know she's not that young in real life, but she's very baby-faced. But she does look a lot like Linda Hamilton, which is quite good. Schwarzenegger, it's a bizarre thing to be able to say this, but I think Schwarzenegger gave the best performance in the film, which is not something you say very often. And the way that they work around his, age, is relatively clever. The first half of the film, I think, is pretty good. The best way I can describe the first half of the film is if you imagine you've got a favourite band and you love their first two albums, and someone brings out a greatest hits album composed of those first two albums, but with re-recorded versions of the songs. That's kind of what it's like watching this film, because it takes place, it starts off in the future, they go back in time to 1984, and you're seeing scenes exactly the same as scenes from the Terminator. And T-1000 turns up and it all goes a bit some sort of elements of Terminator 2 come into it. And it's a bit like the second film, Back to the Future Part 2, when they're running around in the original film, in the second film. It's a bit like that. And I thought that was pretty good. I thought, okay, I'm enjoying this. The second half of the film turns into a bit more of a chase thing, and helicopter chase and a bus chase. And you've seen Tracy with the bus cartwheeling through the air. And that got a little bit boring. But I've got to say, overall, there was some interesting ideas in there. It was well made. It was exciting in places. The first half I thought was actually pretty good. And it's certainly not as bad, I personally think, as people are making it out to be. I think it's actually not a bad movie at all. It's certainly better than Terminator 3 and Terminator 4.
Wow.
I know that's not saying a lot. But with a few changes here and there, it could have been a genuinely decent movie. And then that's a shame, really. I think there's a couple of certainly, Jared Courtney's definitely a mistake in terms of casting as Kyle Reese. There's some really good. There's stuff in it that I thought was actually really good, and stuff that I thought was genuinely quite clever. For a fun 2 hours at the flicks, it worked perfectly for me, and I came out thinking, I enjoyed that, and it's not often I get to say that these days. So there you go. Much to my surprise, I'd probably give it 7.
Okay, so it's not that controversial because Kaz gave it a 6, so you're not that far away.
Yeah, but Kaz's taste when it comes to action films, though, are a bit skewed sometimes. He has given some very strange scores, and he gave Interstellar 10 out of 10, and that was bloody awful. So, it's a bit like asking Chris Machney to review films involving semi-nude men. The scores are going to be off the charts, aren't they? But not necessarily going to reflect the quality of the movie. All
right, so talking about quality movies, Ted 2 is opening this Friday.
I don't know. We'll soon find out.
So, are you going to go and see this?
Yeah, I'm going to go and see it. I mean, admittedly, the only reason I think this film exists is because Ted made tons of money and A Million Ways to Die in the West didn't. But and then when I saw the first trailer for it, I thought, don't like the look of this. It looks a bit forced, and there's no Mila Kunis, and you kind of. I got a very horrible In-Betweeners 2 vibe about it, which is another film that only exists because the first film made so much money. The second trailer, though, was really, really funny. And so I've got a sneaky suspicion it should be a good laugh, even though I'm wary of its existence.
So it'll be a mix between the two trailers, then, is what you're saying. You're saying there'll be a mix. It'll be between the two trailers.
But there were some pretty good gags in the second trailer. That very fun
I've got to say,
so I can't repeat on this podcast, but were really good. I'm sure. I mean, I really, really liked the original Ted. I thought it was funny, and I thought, actually, much to my surprise, again, a bit like with Terminator, I liked Mark Wahlberg, and I don't normally like Mark Wahlberg. Normally, I can't stand the sight of him, but I thought he was pretty good in Ted. And the teddy bear aspect and Seth MacFarlane's voicing was good as always. So my hopes are higher now for this than they were when I saw the first trailer. And I'm sure it'll be a fun hour and a half in the movie. There'll be some good laughs in there. So, and to be honest, I didn't dislike A Million Ways to Die in the West as much as everybody else did. So that's Ted 2. That's coming to the cinema this Friday, and our review is going to be up when, Steve? Well, should be hopefully Thursday night, Friday morning, first thing at the latest. Sharina's going to be reviewing that one for us.
Okay, so keep an eye on the homepage for our review of that. So let's move on to the Blu-ray Roundup. This is for this week and next. It follows Chappie and Focus. Chappie and Focus reviews are on the homepage.
I've actually seen all 3 of these films. In fact, I watched It Follows last night. And it's pretty good. Unfortunately, it's been hyped up massively, including by Simon in his review, I've got to say, as being this incredible horror film and really scary and blah, 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 and really unnerving, and it'll stay with you after you've seen it. And because I think it had been hyped up so much, I was a bit disappointed because it isn't that scary. It's a couple of moments of shocks in it, and it is quite an interesting concept. Basically, it's like a sexually transmitted ghost, best way of describing it. This guy sleeps with this girl and passes on this creature that follows her, literally follows her. Slowly, can only walk very slowly. But no, so seriously, that is the concept. But that sounds silly at first, but if you understand, you've got this thing slowly walking towards you all the time, and it can look like anything, any person. It does become quite unnerving, and it is an interesting idea. I guess it's a sort of commentary on
What happens if you get in a plane and go to the next continent?
Well, I was thinking
just
that.
to
I was
find
thinking,
you,
try walk across
get
the
you
ocean.
eventually.
It just take it a very long time to find. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you can outrun it to a degree, but eventually it's going to catch up with you. I guess it's a metaphor for time, isn't it? Really, I mean, because it's a cast of young characters, and there's no real old characters in the film as main characters. It's just
so it's a bit like Death in the
that
series of films about death. What was that again? Final Destination.
On Destination. Yeah, eventually this thing will catch up with you. And so they obviously the cast, the girl who's been infected with it, if you like, she's trying to find out whether first of all, initially she doesn't believe it, and then she comes to realise she's being followed by this thing. And there's some scary moments in it, and then she tries to get rid of it and this sort of stuff. I thought the ending's a bit ambiguous. It was fun. It was an interesting concept. It was well executed. With an unknown young cast who I thought were pretty good in it, actually. So well performed, well executed, interesting idea. Some decent scares in there, and it is a little bit unnerving at times, but it isn't the horror masterpiece I think it's being touted as, unfortunately. But still worth checking out if you get the chance. Chappie, Neil Blomkamp's new film about a self-aware robot. So it's basically a cross between RoboCop and Short Circuit.
Yeah, which was the byline. I think I didn't need to read the rest of the review. It said it all for me.
No, that's it. But set in Johannesburg. And if you've seen any Neil Blomkamp film, you'll know what to expect. It's more of the same. He needs to get a new trick. It's got some major flaws in it, which I noticed in the thread. People are already starting to point out. The effects, though, are superb. He's really, really good at combining physical and digital effects in the real world and making digital effects look totally realistic. He's incredibly good at that, but he needs to work on screenplay, script and characterization and acting. Here are his weak points, unfortunately. Focus, that's a Will Smith movie where he plays a con man, and I did the review of that for the cinema, and I enjoyed it. It's a fun, confection, a light hour and a half of entertainment. Don't expect too much from it, and you'll be fine.
Is it
heavy.
Will Smith back to his best?
Yeah, he's back to being charming and fun, and he hasn't done that for a long time. So in that sense, I enjoyed it more because it was nice to see Will Smith back to being Will Smith again after such a long time of playing heavier, darker roles. So that was good, and Margot Robbie's very good in it as well as the female lead. And it's good. But if you've seen any con man films, and particularly if you've seen The Sting, you're going to know where this is going pretty quickly. But it's a fun, and it's very glossy and well made and looks expensive.
She was on the TV, wasn't she? Neighbours or something like that, wasn't she?
Margot Robbie's as fit as a butcher's dog.
Yeah,
that's she's in
The Wolf of Wall Street with no
Street
clothes on. So that's worth seeing, if only for that.
Okay. That's your recommendation for the week, is it?
Michael Robbie's knockers, yeah. No, of those films, I would recommend It Follows would be my recommendation for the week.
All right, okay. And just to wrap up, because this was a question that I don't know where it came from, Steve, but you asked it this morning, and it took me forever to figure out which film it was. So what was the first 18 certificate film that you saw at the cinema? So the rules for this are it has to be an 18 certificate. It had to be at the cinema.
Or if you're old enough to go back that far, X.
or X, yeah, okay. And it had to be at the cinema, and you had to be there. You had to go and actually see it. So that was the rules.
To go and see it at a cinema, not watch it on video at home or something. Or get your dad to go and get it from the video shop. You had to actually go and pay and get into the cinema and be, checked for your age and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, right. So it'd probably be 16 for me. So I'm going to work out the year. Let's go Ed first. Ed, what was yours?
I'm pretty sure it was Boogie Nights.
Okay.
But
Christ,
again,
you're young.
Yeah.
Well, I know this is something that we have
when was
brought
that?
up
That was
1997.
Was it 97? Was it? I thought it was 98. Oh, there we go.
Or maybe it's 98. It was definitely around there.
Yeah, I wasn't much younger than 18, but as I say, I've never been particularly big on going to the cinema. And actually, I have to be honest, it was only because my then girlfriend was interested in going to see it. So it's like, yeah, why not? In for a penny, in for a pound. And it was fine. I wasn't 18. Nobody bothered checking my age, and I quite like the film. I own it on. I haven't got a Blu-ray copy of it. I've still got it on DVD.
Okay, so that was well known for its explicit sex scenes, and it was obviously following the porn industry. Do you know what the first one that I saw, first 18 certificate? Basic Instinct.
Get in.
I've just worked it out, and that's where it was. It was Basic Instinct. Nice pert.
Obviously, you went to see the acting and the performances and the story and the plot and everything.
No, I went to see Sharon Stone.
Getting a kit off. A lot. Ed, we're not slightly concerned coming out of Boogie Nights that maybe you weren't measuring up as far as certain things were concerned.
I don't remember being that concerned, no, to be honest.
Oh, it's the Paul Verhoeven on the Laserdisc of Basic Instinct. His commentary track is just classic. The whole scene where the whole sex scene, and he just keeps talking about her nipples and how nice and pert they were.
Those nice nipples looking fantastic. Actually, any Paul Verhoeven commentary track is usually good for a laugh. His one on Starship Troopers, which, speaking of Phil Tippett, he did the effects for, is really funny because he keeps pointing out when it's a digital version of Johnny and when it's the real version of Johnny, but or when it's a digital bug or a real practical effect bug. But he keeps going like. The other guy in the commentary track, I think it's Ed Newmeyer, who wrote the screenplays, like trying to talk about the politics of the film and the subtext, and then all you can hear is Verhoeven going, "Digital bug, real digital Johnny, real Johnny." Just hysterical, and not a commentary by him, but the commentary track on Showgirls by a fan of the film, is also a film critic, is really funny too. He basically just rips it to pieces. So worth listening to if you get a chance.
Right, so 18 certificate is going to be X certificate for you, Steve.
No, it's not quite. I think when did the 18 certificate start? Was it 82? I think it was 82 they changed certifications. I remember going to see, when I was 12, I went to go and see Life of Brian, which was a double A, because back then it was UAAX. And that was my first AA film. And that was like a real rite of passage because everyone at school had seen it. So you had to go and see it. And you were meant to be 14 back then if you to see a AA movie. And I don't think anyone in the queue at that cinema was even above the age of 14. So that's the first time I'd ever seen anyone use the F word in a film and full frontal nudity and all that stuff. It was great. My first by then it had changed to 18. So I was 17 at the time, 1984. But it was The Terminator, which is why I raised the question in the first place. Because my first 18 certificate film at the cinema was The Terminator. Which was, great because it was a fantastic movie. Obviously, I'd seen plenty of stuff, really horrible stuff, on video prior to that, since the age of about 13. But certainly, going and paying, getting into a cinema, that was The Terminator. Yeah,
well, that was the thing. I mean, that was the first time I went to the cinema on my own. With my girlfriend at the time, at 18, or I think I was 16 or 17. I can't remember. But if you're talking about video, we were had one of the first beta machines, and we had a copy of American Werewolf in London, and my parents had gone out to the supermarket, and I put that on, and that would have been 1983, 84.
The film came out in 81.
Yeah, so video would have been
video would have been about 82, 83 is when it kicked off, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I was just a youngin', and
I remember watching.
Scarred me for a long time.
Well, I'll tell you, my first went to the video shop and the bloke said, "Oh, I've got some nice stuff behind the counter, Steve," and it was Zombie Flesh Eaters, which I first saw at the ripe old age of, I think I was 14. And it was quite traumatic. So it was quite interesting interviewing the guy that was actually starring in that film. Remember we did that interview a few years ago?
Yeah.
With Chris for Zombie Flesh Eaters, and so that was kind of weird, thinking I'm talking to the guy who was actually in a film that I found quite traumatic as a 14-year-old seeing him get the eyeball gouged out.
I was 8 when I watched American Werewolf in London, and I think the thing was the dream sequences and the bit where they're watching.
They're really scary.
When they're watching the Muppets and the Nazi monsters come in and start blowing everybody out. That was it for me. And then the bit where he's hunting the deer in the forest, he's dreaming it, and then he thinks he wakes up and he hasn't woken up.
Yeah, no, I mean, American Werewolf is one of those rare films that balances being genuinely funny with being genuinely frightening, and it's quite a difficult act to do, and that's the one that really nails it. I think it's a brilliant, brilliant film. Yeah. And it was one of those films that wasn't that successful at cinema, was it? It kind of found its audience on video. Yeah.
So, what experiences warped you, Ed, when you were a kid?
I think I watched RoboCop at a slightly unsuitably young age, and I've got to be honest. It's a bit of a weird one because the actual Peter Weller death in inverted commas sequence, I remember thinking, well, that's a bit overblown. I remember being much more taken aback when the bloke gets covered in toxic waste. I was like, that's not very nice. But yeah, I don't know. Again, I've never sought out to see films, because everyone else is going, it's got either horrendous violence or unbelievable nudity. It's like, well, fair play. But Equally, in terms of films that, that did screw me up, I do remember just because it was actually just on of a normal sort of weekend afternoon. I watched Jewel, the Spielberg film, with my dad when I was about, I suppose, 5 or 6. And I love that film now. It's possibly my favourite Spielberg film.
You love that, yet you haven't seen Jaws.
Yeah, I know. But I like trucks more than I do sharks. It's as simple as that, really.
Yeah, well,
He uses same sound effect, doesn't he, in both films?
He uses quite a few things out of that. You need to go and watch Jaws.
Oh, shut up. I'll put it on my list of things to do. But I do remember having something of a fear of articulated lorries for a fair amount of time after watching Jaws.
Did that ruin your ambitions becoming a travelling salesman?
Did that put you off Yorkie bars?
Only briefly. But yeah, that was that. In many ways, that was because it was something that, let's face it, sort of murderous drug gangs and cyborgs aren't a big part of your life as a child. Articulated lorries are kind of there in significant numbers. So yeah, I remember thinking, bloody hell, that's not good.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a thing. There's a lot of everyday objects that have been used in movies where, it has created that that kind of effect in people, but it hasn't done it for me in any way that I can think of. But I'm sure there's some that have been put off, like Jaws being put off going in the water again, or getting on a plane, plane crashes, that kind of thing. And
now, I need to stress, this hasn't put me off anything, but in terms of just in terms of things that I mean, I don't believe I've watched it since, is I don't know if it counts as massive spoiler, the sound effect in American History X with the pavement.
Oh, where he snaps his head on the pavement.
No, I don't. If I don't hear that ever again, that's absolutely fine by me.
Right, have you got a copy of that, Steve? You're going to post it up and I'll capture that sound and we'll just play it every 5 minutes on the podcast.
Lovely.
I haven't got American History X actually on DVD. Probably going to get that sequence on YouTube though, actually.
Oh, there's the thing. Yeah, I'll just nick it off YouTube.
It is though. It's. I think I've only ever seen that film once, like you say, Ed, and it's so visceral and
I do not.
It's
need
not
to
that
hear
graphic
that
because
noise.
it's actually in long shot. You don't see that much, but the sound, it really is bite the pavement smack.
Yeah. It's
I
that
mean,
old.
I have to say, obviously, again, and I really have to be vague on this because I'm well aware that people are at different points with Game of Thrones, but there's a particular noise in season 4 involving heads. And yes. and what's more, obviously, things have moved on a bit. Even just on the Sky broadcast, there's enough Dolby Digital energy to give a really convincing sort of echo effect around the arena. It's like, I didn't need to hear that.
Well, you'll be able to listen to it
in Atmos.
Unfortunately for my bank balance, the buggers are going to release.
Oh, you're not going to buy them again just for Atmos, are you?
Thinking about it.
Oh, you silly man! I'll tell you what, I'm going to come up with some Blu-ray stuff and just sell it to you because you'll just buy anything, you. The one for me, before we leave this subject, that's put me off and I could never watch it again was Arachnophobia.
Now, you see, for whatever reason, I don't. There are many creatures that I am deeply, deeply unkeen on, but for whatever reason, spiders are not one of them. So yeah,
I am, because I've been bitten by the sods twice, which was really painful and surprising, I have to say.
Were you in Hong Kong, Steve?
No, this is in England.
Yeah, I mean, if you get a false widow bite,
it wasn't a false widow, but it's just a normal garden spider. But they're pretty big and they can puncture your skin, and it's only like a bee sting, I suppose. But it was more of the shock, I think, of surprise of being bitten by the bloody thing. But it had made me. I'm not arachnophobic. I mean, I've handled tarantula and things like that, but I'm not a big fan of handling spiders in case they bite me again. It's a bit like I'm not scared of snakes, but I don't want to get bitten by one either, for that matter.
Oh no, snakes! I cannot do snakes.
I've handled snakes as well. But I'll tell you what freaked me out. And this isn't a real world thing. Well, I don't think it would happen in the real world. I hope it wouldn't. But the thing that absolutely, completely freaked me out as a kid, I guess I would have been probably about 11 or 12, maybe about 11. I think it was the first showing on TV of Philip Kaufman's remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a sequence where the pods absorb the people and they become copies. Well, this tramp and his dog get absorbed together, and a dog comes bounding across the road at one point with a guy's head. And looking at it now, you can watch it on YouTube. It's kind of a crappy effect, but as a kid, absolutely, totally freaked me out. Really, really did.
If we're talking about that, what was that truly terrible horror film set in the trenches with Billy Elliot?
Death Watch?
Something like that. There's a sequence involving rats.
Was that Michael
That's
Bassett?
Michael J. Bassett.
Yeah, it was Michael Bassett.
Which is quite unpleasant.
My dad's got a massive phobia of rats.
I've never been desperately keen on them. But that's because they're almost unkillable. You know, so I've never been keen on that.
Not that unkillable. My cat keeps killing everything within the 2-mile radius. It's a little white sociopath, like psychopathic little cute faced killer. Keeps bringing in dead and annoyingly not dead things.
She's just bringing back. It is a she, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just bringing back presents for you. That's
if they're not dead.
Why can't she kill them first?
No, because she's worried. She's worried that your hunting skills aren't up to much.
Well, she's right, but the problem is
that's why she's bringing them back.
The mouse disappeared. I don't know where it's gone. I can smell a dodgy smell in the lounge, but I can't find this dead mouse. It's really annoying. I've checked everywhere, every conceivable place where this mouse could hide and die, and I cannot find it.
If you put down a trap, you'll get it. That's one thing.
I think the thing's dead. That's the problem. I think it crawled away in fear and shock and died.
Right.
But I don't know where it's done that. I've checked under the bookcase. I've had to move all the TV equipment and all the. It's a nightmare, and I've done everything, and I cannot find this sodding dead mouse.
Okay,
I can definitely smell something in the background.
If you got any advice on finding dead mice,
please. One of those probes that the police used to find bodies would be quite handy.
Send your advice to getthemouse@avforums.com for attention to Steve. But all seriousness, what was your first 18 certificate film that you went to the cinema and seen, and what horror movie or other movie or even special effect freaked you out as a child, and can you go back and still watch that scene, or has it put you off for life? Let us know in the comment section underneath this podcast in the podcast forum, and that is all we got time for. So my thanks to Steve Withers.
He said there's a storm coming.
And Ed Selley.
Your son gave me a message to give to you. He made me memorise it.
I thought you were going to do the whole scene there.
No, I'm bloody not. Because it's one of the most... Do you know, actually, just my favourite thing about the film we're quoting from Terminator is that because Arnie only had 122 words of dialogue in the entire film, it worked out that he was paid $28,000 a word.
There you go. Not bad work if you can get. Right, so don't forget, you can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook, bookmarkavforums.com for latest reviews, news and video, and leave us a rating on iTunes, Ed, but...
Only if it's 5 stars. Not even 4 3/4, 5.
I'm Phil Hinton, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next Wednesday.